I support my parents with half the mortgage and other utilities. Then they gave my bedroom to my sister's family and told me to sleep on the couch. So I moved out and left them handle the full cost. I was standing in the middle of folding laundry in what used to be my room when my mother appeared in the doorway with that particular expression I'd learned to dread. The look that meant a decision had already been made, and my opinion wasn't part of the equation. "We need to talk about your sister's situation," she said, arms crossed. "Emma and Marcus need a proper bedroom for themselves and the boys. They can't keep everyone crammed in the den. You understand, right?" I stopped mid-folding clothes, a shirt still in my hands. "Okay," I said carefully. "Are they looking at places nearby?" Mom's expression tightened. "Well, that's what we wanted to discuss. It makes more sense for you to take the couch for now, just until they get on their feet. You're single. You don't need all this space for one person." The shirt dropped back into the basket. That conversation was 3 years ago, but it plays in my head with perfect clarity whenever I walk past the building that used to feel like home. What my parents called a temporary arrangement and family helping family had a much simpler name. When you looked at the bank statements and utility bills, it was financial exploitation dressed up in guilt and obligation. And it took me losing a bedroom to finally see the whole picture clearly enough to walk away. Let me back up and explain exactly how I ended up paying half a mortgage for the privilege of being told I was lucky to sleep on furniture. My name is Jordan, and when this story starts, I was 28 working as a data analyst for a mid-sized logistics company. Good job, stable income, the kind of setup that should have meant independence and my own place. Instead, I was living in my childhood home sharing space with parents who had spent the better part of a decade treating my paycheck like a family resource they were entitled to manage. The arrangement started when I was 21, fresh out of college with my first real salary, an amount of student loans that made renting seem impossible. My parents had just bought the house, a decent 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood, and they pitched it as a win for everyone. "Stay with us," Dad had said. "Save money, pay down those loans. We'll keep your old room exactly how it was. Just help out a little with expenses until you're ready to move out." Help out a little turned into something very different within the first 6 months. It started with utilities. "Could you cover the electric this month?" Mom asked. "Your father's overtime got cut, and we're a bit short." Then groceries. "Since you're going to the store anyway, could you grab everything on this list? We'll settle up later." Later never came. By year 2, I wasn't helping out a little. I was covering half the mortgage payment every month, half the utilities without fail, and about 70% of the household groceries. Because my parents had discovered that you eat more because you're younger and your metabolism is faster was an argument I couldn't easily disprove. I mowed the lawn every weekend. I shoveled snow in winter. I picked up my younger sister from high school and later from her part-time job when my parents weren't feeling up to the drive. I assembled furniture, fixed leaky faucets, and troubleshot every tech problem that cropped up in a house where no one else wanted to read an instruction manual. On paper, I was an adult child living at home. In reality, I was an unpaid property manager who also happened to fund half the operating costs. The pattern was so gradual, I didn't notice it becoming permanent. A request here, an emergency. They're always framed as temporary, always paired with some variation of "we'll pay you back," or "just this once," or "family takes care of each other." I remember one particular incident from year 3. My car needed new tires, a genuine safety issue that couldn't wait. I'd been saving for it, had the money set aside in my account. Then Dad's truck broke down. Major repair, over $2,000. And their savings account was empty from a vacation they'd taken the month before. We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. Mom had said, "We can't get to work without the truck. You understand." I understood. I always understood. I paid for the truck repair. I drove on bald tires for another 5 months until I could save again. When I finally mentioned it, Dad looked genuinely confused. "Why didn't you say something? We'd have helped." But they never did help. They never paid me back. The truck repair joined the long list of temporary contributions that became permanent donations to the family fund. But I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being smart, building savings, staying close to family. I told myself that the reason I never seemed to save much despite having no rent was just because I wasn't budgeting well enough. The truth was simpler and uglier. Every time I started to build a cushion, some family emergency appeared. A car repair my parents couldn't quite cover. A dental bill that insurance didn't handle. A loan to my sister for textbooks that was never discussed as something I'd get back. I paid because that's what family does. I paid because saying no meant being selfish. I paid because my parents had raised me to believe that independence was something you earned by proving you'd sacrifice it first. By year 5, I'd stopped even tracking what I was owed. The mental math was too depressing. Somewhere north of $40,000 conservatively, when you added up mortgage contributions, utilities, groceries, repairs, loans, and all the little emergencies that somehow only had one solution: my wallet. What I didn't know, and what became critically important later, was exactly whose name sat on the mortgage documents and why that mattered more than anyone realized. When my parents first tried to buy the house, their credit wasn't good enough. My dad had a history of late payments from a rough patch years earlier, and my mom had medical collections from before they had decent insurance. The bank looked at their application and said, no. That's when they came to me with a folder full of papers and an explanation that sounded so reasonable at the time. We just need you to co-sign, Dad had said. Your credit is clean, you've got steady income, it's only paperwork. We're the ones making the real decisions. You're just helping us get approved. I was 21. I trusted them. I wanted to help. I signed. My name went on the mortgage next to theirs. My name went on the homeowner's insurance policy as an owner-occupant. My credit took on the risk of a loan I was assured I'd never actually have to manage. The loan terms were better because of me. The interest rate dropped because the bank saw a younger borrower with good credit and stable employment living in the property as a primary resident. The insurance premiums were lower because I was listed as someone who occupied and maintained the home. I was the financial scaffolding that made their house affordable, and I didn't even realize it. For 7 years, that setup worked in their favor. I paid half the mortgage, kept the house presentable, and never asked uncomfortable questions about why my helping out had calcified into a permanent financial obligation. My parents got a home they couldn't have qualified for a loan, and I got the comfort of believing I was doing the responsible, mature thing by staying and contributing. Then my sister decided she needed to save money too. Emma was 31, married to Marcus for 6 years, mother to 2 boys aged 5 and 3. She'd been living in a rental across town, and by all accounts doing fine. Not rich, but stable. Marcus worked in sales. Emma did part-time admin work, and they had the kind of life that looked manageable from the outside. But they wanted to buy a house, a real one, bigger than their current rental in a better school district. They wanted to save for a down payment. And apparently the best way to do that was to stop paying their own rent and move back in with our parents instead. Mom and Dad agreed immediately. No discussion with me, no warning. Just a phone call one evening where Mom said, "Your sister's family is moving in for a bit, isn't that nice? It'll be good to have the boys around more." I asked the obvious question. Where are they going to sleep? The den. The den was technically a bedroom, but it was small, used mostly for storage and Dad's home office setup. Cramming 2 adults and 2 young kids in there seemed like a nightmare. Mom hesitated. "Well, we thought you could move to the couch just for a little while. Emma and Marcus need a real room and the boys can't sleep in the den long term. You're flexible. You can make it work." I stared at my phone. "I'm paying half the mortgage," I said slowly. "Why would I be the one losing my bedroom?" "You're being dramatic," Mom said, voice tight. "It's temporary. Family helps family. You of all people should understand that." I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain that temporary and family helps family had already cost me 7 years and tens of thousands of dollars. I wanted to say that maybe Emma and Marcus should keep paying their own rent if they wanted their own bedroom, but I didn't. I said I'd think about it, and I hung up. 2 weeks later, Emma's family moved in. The den got converted into a boys' room with bunk beds and toy bins. Emma and Marcus took my bedroom, my bed, my desk, my closet. All of it cleared out and reassigned like I'd been a guest whose stay had simply run its course. My belongings got shoved into trash bags and stacked in the garage. My clothes lived in a suitcase next to the couch. My privacy became a memory. The first night on that couch, I lay awake until past midnight. The cushions were lumpy, designed for sitting, not sleeping. The living room was never fully dark because of the streetlight outside. I could hear everything. My nephew coughing in the den, my brother-in-law's footsteps in my old room, the toilet flushing, the fridge humming. At night, I lay on a couch in a living room where the TV was on until 11 because Marcus liked to watch late sports. I woke up at 6 when my nephew's cartoons started blaring. I had no door, no walls, no space that was mine. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake to the sound of the coffee maker or my nephew's running through the living room. I'd fold up my blanket, shove my suitcase against the wall, and try to pretend I had somewhere to get ready that wasn't a shared bathroom with a line forming outside. Getting dressed meant either waking up before everyone else or waiting until the house emptied. Showering required negotiating with Emma about when the boys needed the bathroom. Making a phone call for work meant going out to my car and sitting in the driveway. And I was still paying half the mortgage, still covering half the utilities, which had jumped significantly with 4 more people in the house, still buying most of the groceries because now there were 2 more adults and 2 kids eating from the same fridge I was funding. The grocery situation got particularly absurd. I'd buy food for myself, label it, put it in a specific spot. Within 2 days it was gone. Marcus would eat my leftovers. The boys would go through my snacks. Emma would use my ingredients for family dinners. I wasn't invited to plan. When I mentioned it, Mom shrugged. It's just food. Don't be petty. They're family. Petty. That was the word I got when I objected to funding and feeding people who'd taken my bedroom. When I tried to bring it up at dinner one night, Dad cut me off. You're lucky we're letting you stay here as long as we have. He said, most people your age are paying rent somewhere. You've had it easy. A few months on the couch won't kill you. Easy. 7 years of funding their mortgage. 7 years of yard work and school pickups and late-night tech support. 7 years of watching my savings evaporate into family emergencies and temporary loans. And I'd had it easy. Emma chimed in, her voice careful but pointed. We're all making sacrifices. Jordan, Marcus, and I gave up our independence to move back here. The boys had to leave their friends. You're not the only one adjusting. I looked at her, at my sister, who'd voluntarily moved into a house I was paying for, taken my room, and was now lecturing me about sacrifice. I didn't say anything. I just finished eating and went back to the couch. That night, I sat in the dark listening to my brother-in-law snore through the wall of what used to be my room. And I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. I stopped trying to explain. I stopped trying to make them see reason. I opened my laptop and started looking at apartments. The breaking point wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a door slamming. It was just a quiet, private moment where I finally stopped believing that staying and suffering was the same thing as being a good person. I'd spent years thinking that walking away would make me selfish, that moving out would mean I didn't care about family, that protecting my own money and space and peace somehow made me the villain in a story where I was supposed to be grateful for the chance to sacrifice. But sitting on that couch in a house I'd paid for, but didn't own, in a family that saw me as a resource instead of a person, I realized something much simpler. They were never going to stop taking as long as I kept giving. And I was done giving. The next morning, I started planning my exit like it was a work project. Methodical, quiet, and with a very clear end goal. Get out, cut every financial line, and let that house learn what it felt like when the person they called selfish finally stopped paying. I started during my lunch breaks at work, searching rental listings on my phone in my car where no one could see my screen. I made a spreadsheet of potential apartments, compared prices, calculated what I could actually afford when I wasn't subsidizing 5 other people. The math was eye-opening. My half of the mortgage, $1,200 a month. My share of utilities, groceries, and incidentals, another $600 to $800. Total monthly contribution to my parents' household, roughly $2,000. I could rent a 1-bedroom apartment for $1,300 and still come out ahead. I found an apartment within 3 days. Small 1-bedroom, 20 minutes from my office. The landlord was professional, indifferent to my family situation, and only cared that my credit was good and my employment was stable. Both were. I signed a lease. Move-in date 3 weeks. Then I opened a new bank account at a completely different institution, one my parents had no connection to and no visibility into. My paycheck started going there instead of the account my parents had always been able to see. Every auto payment, every bill, every subscription tied to my name and my card got quietly transferred or canceled. I made a list. Mortgage auto draft from my account. Electric bill under my name. Gas bill split with my card on file. Water bill. I'd somehow ended up being primary on internet service in my name. Streaming subscriptions everyone in the house used. Home insurance policy where I was listed as co-owner and occupant. Cell phone plan that covered my parents' phones as well as mine. Grocery delivery service. One by one, I started severing the connections. I changed my direct deposit. I moved money from the old account to the new one in small transfers that wouldn't trigger alerts. I set calendar reminders for when each auto payment would hit and canceled them methodically, one per day, so nothing looked sudden. I didn't announce it. I didn't send a manifesto in the family group chat. I just worked through the list with the same focus I used for data analysis at my job. And I waited for moving day. I bought furniture slowly, carefully, a bed frame from a discount store, a small couch from a colleague who was upgrading, kitchen supplies from thrift stores. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just the basics I'd need to build a life that didn't require permission or apology. The night before I left, I packed everything that was actually mine. Clothes, electronics, documents, a few books. I left the furniture my parents had bought years ago. I left the kitchen supplies I'd been told were for the house. I took what belonged to me and nothing else. I moved out on a Saturday morning while everyone was at my nephew's soccer game. I'd volunteered to stay back and catch up on work which no one questioned because I'd been the reliable one for so long that my presence had become invisible. No dramatic goodbye, no final argument, just boxes, a small rental van, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd never have to ask permission to close a bedroom door again. By the time they got home, I was in my new apartment sitting on the floor with takeout surrounded by unpacked boxes and the best silence I'd heard in years. Then I made the calls that would change everything. First, I called the mortgage lender. Hi, I'm calling about the loan for the property at address. I'm listed as a co-borrower and co-owner. I need to inform you that I no longer reside at that property. I've moved out permanently. The current occupants are my parents and my sister's family of 4. I want the file updated to reflect that I am not living there anymore. There was a pause. You were listed as an owner-occupant on this loan, the representative said carefully. That means the loan terms were based on you living there as your primary residence. I understand. I said I did live there, I no longer do. I'm calling to make sure the file is accurate. We'll need to reassess the loan based on the updated occupancy status. She said this may affect your interest rate, escrow requirements, and monthly payment amount. Owner-occupied loans have different terms than non-owner-occupied or investment properties. I understand, I said again. Please update your records accordingly. She asked a few more verification questions. I answered each one calmly, factually. When she asked if the other borrowers were aware of the change, I said simply, I've informed them that I've moved out. Any questions about the property should be directed to them. Next, I called the homeowner's insurance company. Same script, same calm, factual explanation, same result. If you're no longer occupying the property and there are now additional residents not listed on the original policy, we'll need to reissue this under a different coverage type. The premiums will be higher for a multifamily or quasi-rental situation. That makes sense, I said. Please proceed with whatever updates are necessary. I hung up and turned off my phone. That night, I slept in my own bed in my own room behind a door I could lock in an apartment where no one would ever tell me I was lucky to have a place to sleep. The financial unraveling happened faster than I expected. The first sign came 4 days later, a text from my mom. Did your mortgage payment bounce? The bank says we're short, I replied simply. I moved out. I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore. You told me I was lucky to sleep on the couch. I found somewhere better. My phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails. My dad, my mom, even Emma chiming in with messages about family and responsibility and how I was abandoning everyone. I ignored most of it. The second wave hit a week later when the utility bills came due. The electric company sent a notice that the auto payment had failed. The gas company did the same. The internet service got disconnected entirely because I'd canceled the account and transferred it to my new address. Dad left a voicemail. You need to call me back right now. The power company is threatening to shut off service. The internet is gone. What the heck did you do? I didn't call back. Then came the letter from the bank. My parents called me in a panic. What did you tell them? Dad shouted. They're saying the loan was based on false occupancy information. Our payment is going up by $600 a month. They're talking about an escrow shortage. I kept my voice level. I told them the truth. I don't live there anymore. I'm not an occupant. The loan was set up with me as a resident owner, and that's no longer accurate. They're adjusting the terms to reflect reality. You can't just do that, Mom yelled in the background. You signed papers. You made a commitment. I did. I agreed. And I kept it for 7 years while paying half your mortgage, half your utilities, and most of your groceries. Then you gave my bedroom away and called me selfish for not wanting to sleep on the couch I was paying for. I'm not lying to a bank so you can keep cheaper loan terms for a house I'm not living in. Dad's voice dropped into something colder. We could sue you for this. Breach of contract. Fraud. I almost laughed. Go ahead. Explain to a judge how you had your co-borrower funding half the house while treating them like an inconvenience. Explain how you took their bedroom and gave it to someone who wasn't even on the loan. I'll bring my payment records and my lease. Let's see how that goes. He hung up. The insurance followed with its own adjustments. Higher premiums because of increased occupancy risk. More people, more liability, more cost. The notice arrived explaining that the annual premium was increasing by nearly $800. The internet bill came to the house with a note. Service canceled, final bill attached. The streaming accounts logged everyone out. The cell phone plan I'd been covering got disconnected from my parents' devices. They had to scramble to set up their own plan. Even the small things added up. The grocery delivery service I'd been paying for stopped. The premium coffee subscription I'd gotten as a gift and shared with the house ended. The car wash membership Dad had been using on my account expired. Suddenly, the house that had been easy and no big deal for me to lose a bedroom and became significantly harder to maintain. The mortgage jumped, the insurance jumped, the utilities which I'd been splitting now landed entirely on my parents and my sister's family. The little luxuries I'd been quietly funding Wi-Fi streaming phone service grocery delivery vanished overnight and the argument started. I heard about them secondhand through a cousin who stayed neutral. Emma and Marcus were furious that the temporary cheap living situation had turned expensive. They'd been planning to save $1,500 a month. Now they were barely breaking even after their share of the inflated bills. Dad kept raging that I'd sabotaged them by lying to the bank, which was ironic, considering the loan had been based on my occupancy from the start. Mom alternated between guilt-tripping voicemails and cold silence. The family group chat, which I'd muted, apparently became a war zone of blame and finger-pointing. My cousin sent me a screenshot once. Emma had written, "How were we supposed to know Jordan was the one keeping everything affordable?" They never said anything. I stared at that message for a long time. 7 years of mortgage payments, 7 years of utility bills, 7 years of groceries and repairs and family emergencies, I'd fund it. And somehow, I'd never said anything except I had. Every time I'd mentioned feeling stretched thin financially. Every time I'd said no to something for myself because I'd just paid for something for the house. Every time I'd quietly absorbed another cost without pushing back. They just hadn't been listening. Some relatives thought I was cruel. Others quietly admitted they'd have done the same thing. A few weeks in, my parents tried negotiation. They showed up at my apartment unannounced. I made the mistake of answering the door. "We need to talk," Mom said, not asking to come in, just stepping forward like entry was assumed. I blocked the doorway. "We can talk here," I said. Dad's jaw tightened, but he stayed put. "This situation is not sustainable," he said. "The house payment is killing us. Your sister and Marcus can't save anything. We need you to come back." "I have a lease," I said. "Break it," Mom said. "We'll help with the fee. Just come back. Put your payments back in place and call the bank. Tell them you're living there again." There it was. Not an apology, not acknowledgement, just a request to resume funding their lifestyle and lying to financial institutions so they could keep the terms they wanted. "No," I said simply, "you can have your room back." Emma called from behind them. She'd apparently come along for this intervention. "We'll make it work. The boys can share with us for a while." "I don't want my room back," I said. "I want my own place. I have it now." "You're really going to destroy your own family over a couch?" Dad asked, voice tight. "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm just not paying for your decisions anymore. You wanted Emma's family to have my room. You got that? You just didn't want to pay the full cost of it. That's not my problem now." Mom's voice cracked. "We're your parents. We raised you. You owe us." "I paid you," I said quietly. "For 7 years I paid you. Tens of thousands of dollars. I don't owe you my bedroom, my privacy, or one more month of pretending that being used is the same as being family." I stepped back and closed the door. They stood outside for a few minutes. I could hear muffled voices, Mom crying, Dad's angry muttering. Eventually they left. I sat on my couch in my apartment and felt nothing but relief. The fallout played out over the next 6 months in ways I only learned about later. The mortgage increase stuck. The bank had every right to reassess once the occupancy changed, and my parents couldn't argue their way out of it without admitting they'd misrepresented the loan terms from the start. The insurance stayed higher. More people, more risk, more premium. Simple math. Emma and Marcus, who'd moved and expecting to save thousands, found themselves covering a much bigger share of household costs than they'd planned. Their down payment fund stalled. Fights broke out over who should pay what percentage, especially when Marcus pointed out that they'd given up their affordable rental to move into a situation that was somehow costing them more. My parents, who'd spent years treating my income like a household utility they were entitled to access, suddenly had to actually budget. Vacations got canceled, repairs got delayed. The little extras they'd taken for granted, cable premium internet, new furniture, eating out twice a week, disappeared from the spending plan. Dad had to pick up extra shifts. Mom went back to work part-time at a job she'd left years ago. The house that was supposed to make their lives easier had become a weight they could barely carry. By month 4, Emma's family moved out. They couldn't save money in a house that cost more than their old rental once you factored in their share of the new mortgage and utilities. They found a smaller place cheaper than before and left my parents with a 3-bedroom house they could barely afford alone. My parents were stuck. They tried to refinance. The bank took one look at their income, their credit, and the property value and said no. Without me on the loan, they didn't qualify for better terms. They were locked into a payment structure that reflected what the house actually cost when you didn't have a financially responsible co-borrower subsidizing everything. I heard through my cousin that they'd considered selling, but they were barely above water on the loan. After closing costs and fees, they'd walk away with almost nothing. They were trapped in a house they'd insisted I was lucky to sleep on a couch in. I, on the other hand, was fine. My apartment was small but mine. I paid rent to a landlord who'd never once told me I was selfish for wanting a bedroom. I decorated the space the way I wanted. I ate food I bought with my own money from a fridge no one else raided. I slept in a bed behind a door that locked in a silence that belonged to me. I started saving money, real money accumulating in an account that only I had access to. Within 6 months, I had an emergency fund. Within a year, I was looking at investment options. The financial stability I'd been promised would come from living at home and saving on rent finally arrived once I started actually paying rent somewhere else. Some family members stopped speaking to me. A few sent messages calling me heartless, cruel, ungrateful. Others reached out quietly to say they understood. One uncle admitted he'd been in a similar situation decades ago and wished he'd had the guts to walk away sooner. A cousin confessed she'd always thought it was weird how much my parents relied on me financially. I didn't gloat. I didn't send snarky updates or post about it online. I just lived my life, paid my bills, and slowly started to remember what it felt like to make decisions for myself instead of for a family that saw me as an ATM with a pulse. About 8 months after I moved out, I ran into my mom at a grocery store. She looked older, more tired. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a second, I thought she might walk away. Instead, she came over. "How are you?" she asked, voice careful. "I'm good," I said. "You?" She hesitated. "It's been hard. The house is expensive. Your father is stressed. We didn't realize how much you were covering until it was gone." I nodded. "That was the problem," I said quietly. "You didn't realize, or maybe you did, and you just didn't think I'd ever stop." She looked like she wanted to argue then didn't. "We shouldn't have taken your room," she said finally. "That was wrong. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't acknowledgement of 7 years of financial exploitation or the casual cruelty of calling me selfish for refusing to sleep on a couch I was paying for. But it was something. Thank you for saying that," I said. We stood there for a moment. Two people who used to live in the same house, now separated by choices and boundaries and a mortgage payment that finally told the truth about who'd been holding things together. "Are you ever coming back?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm not." She nodded slowly, and I could see her absorbing it. The reality that I wasn't a resource she could guilt back into position. That the days of me funding her life while being treated like an inconvenience were over. "Take care of yourself," I said, and I meant it. I walked away, paid for my groceries, and drove back to my apartment where no one was waiting to tell me I was lucky to have a place to sleep. A year after I moved out, I got a message from Emma. She and Marcus had bought a house smaller than they'd wanted, farther from the good school district, but theirs. She said she was sorry for how things had gone, that she hadn't understood how much I'd been contributing, that she wished they'd handled it differently. She didn't say she wished she'd stood up for me when Mom and Dad took my room. She didn't acknowledge that she'd benefited from my displacement, but she acknowledged it had been wrong, and that was more than I'd expected. I appreciated the message. I didn't rush to rebuild the relationship, but I appreciated it. My parents and I maintain minimal contact now. Birthdays, major holidays, the occasional text. I don't visit the house. They don't ask me to. When we do see each other at family events, it's polite, distant, carefully neutral. The mortgage is still in all our names, a legal artifact of a time when I thought helping family meant letting them take everything. I've consulted lawyers about getting my name removed, but it's complicated and expensive and frankly not worth the stress. It doesn't affect my credit as long as they keep paying, which they do barely every month. What matters is that I'm not paying it anymore. I'm not funding their lives. I'm not the invisible financial scaffolding that made their choices affordable. I learned a lot from that couch. I learned that family helps family often means one person gives until there's nothing left while everyone else takes until you're empty. I learned that calling someone selfish is often just a way to guilt them into continuing to sacrifice. I learned that walking away isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's the only sane response to people who've mistaken your kindness for weakness and your money for their right. And I learned that the best revenge isn't dramatic or loud. It's just stopping the payments, stopping the excuses, stopping the endless, exhausting work of pretending that being used is the same as being loved. My parents wanted me to sleep on a couch in a house I was paying half for. I gave them something better. I gave them the full cost of their choices delivered in mortgage statements and insurance bills and utility notices and the quiet, permanent absence of someone they'd taken for granted for too long. They call me selfish. I called a moving company, opened a new bank account, informed a mortgage lender of an occupancy change, and let the house feel what selfish really looked like when it wasn't subsidized anymore.